Minister, for being here. I want to start off first by welcoming the fact that we're now at over 170,000 children availing of the school transport system, which is a huge increase on the 120,000. And I also want to welcome that in the programme for government we've committed to having another 100,000 by 2030. And I also understand the difficulty that we have in recruiting bus drivers. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that the system is currently just too rigid. I understand that there's probably only 2% that are experiencing challenges with the system. But for those 2%, you have parents who are stressed out of their minds, they're dealing with uncertainty, they're so anxious, both from a practical perspective and a financial perspective. And I especially think that this affects rural families. We need to start earlier in the summer with this system so that we're avoiding late summer panic, and also for parents who are struggling to budget when they're finding out late August if they have to pay or not. We need more funding here. We really need better communication. I think when people are contacting their TDs, it's because the system isn't working for them and they're struggling to get that contact. So better communication would really ease the situation here. More transparency around who's getting tickets when it comes down to the concessionary tickets, and then more flexibility, especially with using local knowledge. We look at this with the nearest and second nearest school rule, where the system is just too rigid and not taking into account local knowledge and feeder schools. So I think of students in Glen Hest outside Newport who were advised by the system that St Gerald's is their nearest school. But nobody in Glen Hest goes to St Gerald's schools in Castlebar, because the Sacred Heart School in Westport, Santa Maria School in Lewisburg, and Rice College in Westport, they're the feeder schools for Glen Hest. And I'll just selfishly take this moment to congratulate my own school, Sacred Heart, on their centenary this week. Another challenge of this nearest school rule is not taking into account, that we're in a modern Ireland now, and you have parents working in different towns. You need to take into account school preferences and subject interests. For example, some schools don't teach music, where you have a gifted student who loves music and wants to go to a school that teaches it. We have to keep siblings together, where you have some secondary schools that maybe don't offer an autism classroom. I have two twins where, one student will miss out on school transport if he goes to the same school as his twin. So we need to respect tradition, and we need to keep flexibility in mind. I have a quote from one mum who reached out to me. She said, "Not knowing until the beginning of August, just weeks before the school year starts, whether you will need €75 or €800 to cover transport costs is so nerve-wracking." This also comes into account when we look again at Santa Maria School, where we have 3 buses leaving Westport to go out to Santa Maria. There's a huge tradition of going out to Santa Maria School in Lewisburg. For one child, it's €850 per year. For 2 children, €1,450. And if you have 3 children going to Santa Maria, it's €1,800. So again, if flexibility could be applied here and local knowledge, you could see, okay, if there's 3 buses going from one town to another, even if it's not the nearest or second nearest school, surely we should try and support people in those communities. When we look at the concessionary tickets, and I talked about transparency, I had one student who there was 10 people on a waiting list for concessionary tickets, and 9 tickets were available. And so what they'd said was, in the interest of fairness, we'll pull the names out of a hat. But that's not taking into account that some families don't have cars. In some areas there might not be safe footpaths or drop-off areas. And again, I heard another deputy talk about disadvantaged families. So pulling a name out of a hat might seem fair, but when you take into account people's individual circumstances, it's not really. The last thing I want to mention in the limited time I have left is just in relation to additional needs or disabled children that are getting bus transport. And here I think that we really need to look at clear guidelines around simple things like food. If you have autistic children, a lot of the times that can be also accompanied with restrictive eating. And so to make sure your child is fed going out the door, that might mean sending them to school with a slice of toast. But we hear sometimes no eating allowed on this bus, no drinks allowed on this bus. And I spoke to you last week, Minister, and I'll just mention it again on the floor here, about increased training and support for bus escorts who are often dealing with distressed behaviour. So I'll finish by saying, let's put families first, let's put rural Ireland first here, and let's move away from the rigid rules. Thank you.
Deputy Callaghan.
Thank you very much, Laska Hirlock.